The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 4B were the only things separating the Pendelton family from the millions they believed were rightfully theirs. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and anxious sweat. When Judge Walters finally slammed his gavel down, the sound echoed like a gunshot, freezing everyone in place. Linda Pendleton's triumphant smile faltered, then vanished entirely as the judge turned his gaze toward the back of the room. There stood Sarah, the quiet, grey-clad woman they had mocked, bullied, and treated as a servant for 10 years. She didn't look down this time. She looked straight ahead. And when the judge read the final verdict, Linda's designer handbag slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a thud that nobody heard over the sound of their own lives shattering. The mouse hadn't just won. She had owned them the entire time. The rain in Seattle was relentless on the day Arthur Pendleton was buried. It was a fitting backdrop for the gloom that hung over the sprawling Pendleton estate, a massive Victorian mansion perched on a cliff overlooking the grey, churning ocean. But while the sky wept for Arthur, his family certainly did not. Sarah Jenkins stood by the open grave, her cheap black umbrella struggling against the wind. She was 32, but today she felt ancient. Her coat was worn at the elbows, and her shoes were sensible scuffed leather boots that had seen better days. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the mahogany casket being lowered into the wet earth. She was the only one crying. To her left, huddled under a massive chauffeur-held canopy, stood the grieving family. There was Arthur's daughter, Linda Pendleton Smythe, wrapped in a fur coat that likely cost more than Sarah made in 5 years. Beside her was her husband, Robert, checking his gold Rolex every 30 seconds, and their son, Brett, who was busy scrolling through his phone, looking bored. They hadn't visited Arthur in 6 years, not once, not when he broke his hip, not when the dementia started to creep in at the edges of his brilliant mind, not when he was bedridden for the last 3 months, calling out names of people long dead. Only Sarah had been there. Sarah, the distant niece from a forgotten branch of the family tree. Sarah, who had dropped out of her nursing program to care for the old man when no one else would. She had changed his sheets, cooked his meals, read him the Wall Street Journal every morning, and held his hand as he took his last breath. "Finally," Linda whispered, loud enough for Sarah to hear over the patter of rain. "God, this service is dragging on. I have a flight to Milan on Thursday. We need to get the asset liquidation started tomorrow." "Quiet, Linda," Robert hissed, though he didn't look displeased. "Let the old man get in the ground first. Then we call the realtors." Brett snickered, pocketing his phone. "I already called the guy about the vintage Porsche in the garage. It's mine, right? Grandpa promised me that car when I was 10. "He promised you a lot of things before you got arrested for the DUI, Brett," Linda snapped, then smoothed her hair. "But yes, it's all ours. Who else would it go to?" They didn't even look at Sarah. To them, she was part of the furniture. A paid employee, nothing more. They didn't know that Arthur hadn't paid Sarah a salary in 2 years because his liquid assets were frozen in a complicated audit. She had lived off her meager savings to buy his groceries. As the priest finished the final prayer, Sarah stepped forward to place a single white rose on the casket. "Goodbye, Uncle Arthur," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Rest now." As she turned to leave, Brett stepped in her path. He was tall, handsome in a cruel way, and smelled of expensive scotch. "Hey, Mouse," he said, using the nickname they'd given her years ago because of her quiet demeanor. "Mom wants the keys to the main house. We're staying there tonight to do inventory." Sarah clutched her purse tighter. Inventory. But Mr. Henderson said, I don't care what the lawyer said, Linda interrupted, stepping up beside her son. Her eyes were cold, hard flint. We are the next of kin. You were just the help. Honestly, Sarah, you should be grateful we let you stay in the guest cottage this long. I expect you to be packed and out by noon tomorrow. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Out? But I have nowhere to go. Uncle Arthur said I could stay until— Uncle Arthur is dead, Robert said, stepping forward, his voice booming. The free ride is over. Hand over the keys, now. Trembling, Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the heavy iron keyring. Linda snatched it from her hand, her long red nails grazing Sarah's skin like talons. Pathetic, Linda muttered as they walked away toward their waiting limousine, leaving Sarah standing alone in the rain and mud. Sarah watched them go. She didn't fight back. She never fought back. That was why they loved to target her. She was the path of least resistance, or so they thought. She walked back to the small guest cottage at the edge of the estate, the only home she had known for a decade. Inside it was warm and smelled of the cinnamon tea Arthur used to love. She sat on the edge of her small bed and looked at the framed photo on her nightstand. It was her and Arthur smiling on the porch last summer. I don't know what to do, Arthur, she whispered to the photo. Her phone buzzed. It was a text message from Mr. Henderson Arthur's longtime attorney, and perhaps the only other person in the world who respected her. Meeting at the firm, 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Mandatory attendance for all potential beneficiaries. Don't be late, Sarah. Wear your blue suit. Sarah frowned. She didn't have a blue suit. She only had her funeral black and her nursing scrubs. But there was something in Henderson's tone, something urgent. She didn't pack. Not yet. The offices of Henderson O'Malley and Partners were located in a glass skyscraper in downtown Seattle, offering a panoramic view of the city that Arthur Pendelton had practically built. The conference room was vast, dominated by a long mahogany table that shone under the recessed lighting. Linda, Robert, and Brett were already seated on one side, looking like a tribunal. Linda had traded her furs for a sharp, aggressive Chanel suit. Robert was reviewing documents with a personal accountant he had brought along. Brett was spinning in the leather chair, looking hungover. When Sarah entered wearing a modest grey skirt and a white blouse she had ironed 3 times, the conversation stopped. "Oh, look," Brett drawled. "The maid is here. Did you come to return the spare towels?" "Sit down, Sarah, Mr." Henderson said from the head of the table. He was an older man with white hair and spectacles that magnified his sharp, intelligent eyes. He didn't smile at the Pendletons. Sarah took the seat furthest from the family near the door. She felt small, out of place among the leather and chrome. "Let's get this over with," Robert said, checking his watch again. "We have a meeting with the developer at 2. We're tearing down the mansion to build condos." Sarah gasped. "You can't. Arthur loved that house. He built it for Aunt Marie." "It's a money pit," Linda said dismissively, not even looking at Sarah. "Prime real estate wasted on a dusty museum. It's coming down." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. The sound was dry and commanded instant silence. He opened a thick leather folder in front of him. Arthur Pendleton was a man of specific tastes and very specific instructions, Henderson began. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur James Pendleton, dated 6 months ago." 6 months. Robert narrowed his eyes. "I thought his will was from 2015, the one that left everything to the family trust." "That will was revoked," Henderson said calmly. "Mr. Pendleton was of sound mind and body when he drafted this new document. I have the video affidavits to prove it should you wish to challenge his competency. I advise against it. The legal fees would be astronomical. Linda waved her hand impatiently. Fine, fine. Just read it. What do we get? Henderson adjusted his glasses. To my nephew Robert Pendelton, I leave my collection of antique golf clubs. You always admired them, though you never had the swing to use them properly. Robert blinked. Golf clubs? That's it. What about the stocks, the bonds? To my sister-in-law, Linda. Henderson continued, ignoring the outburst. I leave the sum of $50,000. This is to cover the cost of the cosmetic surgeries you always told me I should pay for, so you could look the part of a Pendelton. Linda turned a shade of purple that clashed horribly with her suit. Is this a joke? $50,000. That won't even cover my credit card bill for this month. We are his family. And to my grandnephew Brett, Henderson read on, I leave the 1967 Porsche 911. Yes. Brett pumped his fist. Finally. However, Henderson paused. The sheet is to be held in a trust accessible only upon Brett providing proof of 3 years of continuous sobriety and gainful employment. Brett slammed his fist on the table. You can't do that. That's my car. That is the entirety of the specific bequests, Henderson said, closing the folder. The room went silent. Wait a minute. Robert stood up, his face red. The estate is worth over $40 million. The house alone is worth 10. Where is the rest of it? Who is the residual beneficiary? Henderson clasped his hands together. The remainder of the estate, including the house, the investment portfolio, the patent rights, and the Pendelton Charitable Foundation, is left to a single beneficiary. Linda's eyes darted around the room. Who did he leave it to, a cat sanctuary or the church? No, Henderson said. He looked toward the end of the table. He left it to Sarah Jenkins. For a solid 10 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Then Linda laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. Sarah, the nurse, you're joking. She's not even a real Pendelton. She's a charity case. She is the sole beneficiary, Henderson repeated firmly, and the executor of the estate. Sarah sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Me, she whispered. But I don't know anything about running a company. You tricked him, Linda shrieked, leaping to her feet and pointing a manicured finger at Sarah. You manipulated a senile old man. You gold-digging little snake. I knew you were up to something, creeping around that house all these years. Mrs. Smythe, sit down, Henderson warned. I will not sit down, Linda screamed. This is fraud, undue influence. We will sue. We will bury you in court litigation until you don't have a dime left to buy generic cat food. You won't see a penny of this money, Sarah. I promise you that. Robert was already on his phone, shouting at someone. Get the legal team. Now. We're contesting the will. Yes, today. Sarah looked at Mr. Henderson, panic rising in her chest. Mr. Henderson, I can't fight them. They have money. They have power. Henderson looked at her with a soft expression. Sarah Arthur knew this would happen. He prepared for it. But you have to be strong. The next few weeks are going to be ugly. Ugly? Brett sneered, leaning over the table toward Sarah. We're going to destroy you. You're going to wish you'd never met my grandfather. Sarah looked at the three of them. The people who should have been family, now looking at her like a pack of wolves eyeing a wounded deer. She thought of Arthur. She thought of how he cried at night, because they never called. She thought of how Linda had asked the doctors to speed things up when Arthur had pneumonia 2 years ago. Something inside Sarah, a tiny spark that had been dormant for years, flickered to life. She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she stood. "I didn't ask for this," Sarah said, her voice quiet but clear. "But Arthur wanted me to have it. And for once in your lives, you're going to have to respect what he wanted." "Get an out," Linda hissed. "Get out of my sight before I drag you out." Sarah gathered her purse and walked to the door. As she reached for the handle, Linda shouted one last threat. "Don't get comfortable in that house, Sarah. We're filing an emergency injunction this afternoon. You'll be homeless by Friday." Sarah walked out of the office, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had inherited $40 million. And she had inherited a war. The war Linda Pendelton promised didn't start with a bang. It started with a suffocating silence, followed by a deafening roar of public humiliation. For the first 3 days after the reading of the will, Sarah stayed inside the main mansion. She had moved from the guest cottage at Mr. Henderson's insistence. "Possession is 9/10 of the law," he had told her. "Sleep in the master bedroom. Make them see you live there." But living in the Pendelton manor felt like living inside a mausoleum. The heat had been turned off, a clerical error by the utility company that Sarah suspected was Robert's doing, and the vast empty hallways echoed with the sound of her own footsteps. She wrapped herself in Arthur's old wool blankets and sat in the library, trying to make sense of the mountains of paperwork Henderson had sent over. Then the media trucks arrived. It started with a single van from a local tabloid parked right at the front gates. By noon, there were 3. By evening, a drone was buzzing against the library window like an angry hornet. Sarah turned on the old television in the den, her hands trembling as she tuned into the local news. The headline made her stomach drop. "Elder abuse, scandal. The nurse who stole the Pendelton empire." On the screen, Linda was standing outside the courthouse, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked devastated, a perfect performance for the cameras. "We just want justice for my father," Linda sobbed into the microphones. "He was vulnerable. He was confused. We tried to see him, but that woman, she kept us away. She isolated him. She drugged him. She manipulated a sick old man into signing away his family's legacy. We are terrified to think of what his final days were like under her care." Sarah gasped, dropping the remote. "Liar," she whispered to the empty room. "You never came. You never called." But the court of public opinion didn't care about the truth. It cared about the story. And Linda was telling a compelling one. Later that afternoon, Sarah's phone began to ring incessantly. Unknown numbers. Threatening texts. Someone had leaked her personal cell number online. "Gold digger. You belong in jail. Watch your back." She turned the phone off, feeling the walls closing in. She went to the kitchen to make tea, only to find the taps running dry. Another clerical error. Panic began to set in. She had no access to the estate accounts, yet the bank had frozen them pending the litigation. She had $40 in her purse and a pantry full of expired canned goods. She was a multi-millionaire on paper, but in reality she was starving and freezing in a mansion she couldn't afford to heat. Just as the sun began to set, casting long, creepy shadows across the lawn, a heavy pounding echoed from the front door. Sarah hesitated. Mr. Henderson had told her not to open the door to anyone except him. But the pounding continued, aggressive and rhythmic. She crept to the foyer and peered through the peephole. It wasn't the police. It wasn't reporters. It was Brett. And he wasn't alone. He was with 2 other men, large, thick-necked men, wearing leather jackets, who looked like they bounced at the kind of clubs Brett frequented. "Open up, Sarah!" Brett shouted, his voice slurring slightly. "I know you're in there, you little leech. I want my car keys." Sarah backed away from the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Go away, Brett. I'm calling the police." "Call them." Brett laughed, kicking the door. "My uncle is the deputy chief. Who do you think they're going to believe? The grieving grandson or the squatter?" The wood of the door frame splintered slightly under a heavy kick. "We're coming in, Sarah. We're going to help you pack." Terrified, Sarah ran. She didn't run upstairs. That was a trap. She ran toward the back of the house, toward the servants' entrance that led into the dense woods bordering the cliffs. She fumbled with the latch, her fingers slipping on the cold metal. Crack! The front door gave way. She heard heavy boots on the marble floor of the foyer. "Find her," Brett's voice echoed, "and tear this place apart. If there's cash in the safes, it's ours." Sarah threw the back door open and sprinted into the cold night air. The rain had returned, freezing and sharp. She didn't have a coat, just her cardigan. She scrambled over the wet leaves, heading for the old caretaker's shed near the tree line. It was the only place she could think to hide where they wouldn't look. She huddled in the darkness of the shed, smelling gasoline and damp earth, listening to the sounds of glass breaking inside the mansion, 100 yards away. They were destroying Arthur's home. She wrapped her arms around her knees and cried silent, heaving sobs. She wanted to give up. She wanted to walk back inside, hand them the keys, and sign whatever paper they wanted, just to make it stop. "Arthur, I can't do this," she prayed. "I'm not strong enough. They're monsters." As she shifted in the dark, her hand brushed against something cold and metallic, tucked behind a stack of old paint cans. It was a heavy, fireproof lockbox. Sarah frowned. She recognized it. Arthur used to keep it under his bed years ago, before the dementia got bad. He had told her once in a moment of clarity, "If the wolves ever get in the henhouse, Sarah, look for the grey box. But only when the wolves are inside." She had forgotten about it until now. With trembling hands, she pulled the box into her lap. It was locked, but Sarah knew where the key was. Arthur had taped it to the underside of the lawnmower seat, a paranoid hiding spot. He had chuckled about for years. She felt under the seat of the rusted riding mower next to her. The key was there, corroded, but intact. Outside, she could hear Brett shouting her name, his voice getting closer to the woods. "Sarah! Come out, mouse. We just want to talk." She jammed the key into the lockbox and twisted. It clicked open. Inside there was no money. There were no jewels. There was only a thick stack of documents, a digital voice recorder, and a leather-bound journal. Sarah picked up the journal. On the cover, in Arthur's shaky handwriting, was written, "The sins of the family." She opened the first page. Entry October 14th, 2019. "Robert came by today. He thinks I was asleep. I heard him on the phone with his broker. He's been siphoning the pension fund for the factory workers. He thinks I'm too far gone to notice the discrepancies in the ledger. He's stealing from the men and women who built this company. I have to stop him, but I need proof." Sarah's eyes widened. She flipped to another page. Entry February 3rd, 2021. "Linda changed my medication again. I feel foggy, dizzy. I kept the pill she gave me under my tongue and spat it out later. It wasn't my heart medication. It was a sedative. She wants me docile so she can get power of attorney. She's trying to kill me slowly." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This wasn't just a dispute over a will. This was evidence of attempted murder and corporate embezzlement. There she is. A beam of light cut through the darkness of the shed. Brett stood in the doorway, a flashlight in his hand, and a cruel grin on his face. "Found you," he sneered. Sarah clutched the box to her chest. She had the weapon she needed, but she was trapped. Brett stepped into the shed, the two thugs squeezing in behind him. The space suddenly felt microscopic. The air reeked of rain and stale alcohol from Brett's breath. "What do you have there, Sarah?" Brett asked, shining the light directly into her eyes, blinding her. "Stealing the family silver before you make a run for it." "Get out," Sarah said. Her voice was shaking, but her grip on the box was iron tight. "This is private property." "It's my property," Brett spat. "Everything here is mine. Give me the box." He lunged for her. Sarah didn't think. She reacted. She swung the heavy metal lockbox with all her strength. The corner of the box connected with Brett's outstretched hand with a sickening crunch. Brett howled, dropping the flashlight as he clutched his wrist. "You broke my hand, you crazy witch." The flashlight rolled on the floor, casting chaotic shadows against the walls. In the confusion, Sarah shoved past one of the thugs. He grabbed at her cardigan, tearing the fabric, but she twisted away, adrenaline flooding her system like high-octane fuel. She burst out of the shed and ran. Not back to the house, they would corner her there. She ran towards the main road, toward the heavy iron gates of the estate. "Get her!" Brett screamed from behind her. "Don't let her leave with that box!" The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the driveway into a river of mud. Sarah slipped, scraping her knees, but scrambled back up. She could hear the heavy footsteps of the men, pounding the pavement behind her. They were faster, stronger. She reached the gate. It was locked. The electronic keypad was dead because the power was out. "Nowhere to go, Sarah," one of the men shouted, slowing down to a walk. They spread out, blocking her escape route back to the grounds. Sarah backed up against the cold iron bars. She hugged the box, looking frantically for a way out. There was none. Then a pair of headlights swept across the wet asphalt. A car was coming up the private road toward the gate. It wasn't a police car. It was a sleek black sedan. It pulled up to the gate and stopped. The window rolled down. A woman with sharp features and silver hair, cut in a severe bob, looked out. She saw Sarah, soaked and terrified, backed against the gate by 3 menacing men. "Open the pedestrian gate, girl," the woman commanded. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and carried over the sound of the rain. I can't. It's locked," Sarah cried. The woman inside the car said something to her driver. The driver, a mountain of a man, stepped out. He walked to the gate, ignored the keypad, and produced a bolt cutter from the trunk. With a single snap, the chain holding the side gate fell. He pushed the gate open and ushered Sarah toward the car. "Hey," Brett yelled, running up, clutching his injured wrist. "Stay out of this. This is a family matter." The silver-haired woman stepped out of the car. She stood under a large umbrella held by her driver. She looked at Brett with an expression of pure disdain. "You must be the grandson," she said, "the one with the drinking problem and the sense of entitlement." "Who are you?" Brett demanded, though he faltered under her gaze. "I am Beatrice Sharp," she said. "I was Arthur's business partner in the 70s before you were born, and currently I am the person saving this young woman from an assault charge." She turned to Sarah. "Get in the car, Sarah. Mr. Henderson called me. He thought things might get Messy tonight. Sarah didn't hesitate. She dove into the back seat of the warm, dry sedan, clutching the lockbox like a lifeline. Beatrice got in beside her, and the car peeled away, leaving Brett and his goons standing in the rain, shouting obscenities. Inside the car, the silence was luxurious. Beatrice Sharp handed Sarah a towel. "Dry off," Beatrice said. "You're dripping on the leather." "Thank you," Sarah stammered, shivering violently. They broke into the house. They were going to hurt me." "They are desperate," Beatrice said. "Desperate people do stupid things. Henderson told me about the injunction. Linda filed it an hour ago. A Judge Miller, a golf buddy of Robert's, signed it. You are legally barred from entering the estate until the hearing on Monday." "So I'm homeless?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "No," Beatrice said. "You're staying with me. Arthur made me promise a long time ago that if anything happened, I'd look out for you. I thought the old fool was being paranoid. Turns out he was prophetic." Beatrice looked down at the lockbox in Sarah's lap. "Is that what I think it is?" "It's proof," Sarah whispered. "Arthur wrote everything down. Robert stealing money. Linda drugging him." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. "Well then, it seems we have ammunition. But we can't use it yet." "Why not?" Sarah asked. "We can go to the police. The police in this district answer to Robert's checkbook," Beatrice said, "and that journal is inadmissible without corroboration. It's the ramblings of a man diagnosed with dementia. Any decent lawyer, and Linda has hired the best sharks in the city, will tear it apart. They'll claim you forged it, or that Arthur was hallucinating." Sarah slumped. "So it's useless?" "Not useless," Beatrice said. "It's a map. It tells us where the bodies are buried. But to win, Sarah, to really win, we need to catch them in the act. We need to let them think they've won." The car turned onto the highway, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. "On Monday," Beatrice continued, "we go to court for the preliminary hearing. They are going to strip you of your executor status. They are going to freeze your assets indefinitely. They are going to humiliate you." "I can't handle that," Sarah said, tears welling up again. Beatrice reached out and gripped Sarah's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You can. You took care of a dying man for 10 years while they parted in Europe. You are stronger than all of them combined. You just need to learn how to fight dirty. Are you ready to learn?" Sarah looked at the lockbox, then back at Beatrice. She thought of Brett kicking down the door. She thought of Linda's fake tears on the news. "Teach me," Sarah said. Monday morning arrived with the weight of a funeral. The courthouse was a fortress of grey stone surrounded by a circus of media vans. When Sarah stepped out of Beatrice's car, the flashbulbs were blinding. Reporters shouted questions that felt like accusations. "Sarah, is it true you forged the will? Sarah, did you refuse Arthur his medication? How does it feel to steal from a grieving family?" Sarah kept her head high, wearing a navy blue suit Beatrice had bought for her. It was sharp-tailored and made her look like a CEO, not a nurse. Beatrice walked beside her, a stone-faced guardian. Mr. Henderson met them at the steps, looking grim. "Bad news," Henderson muttered as they walked through the metal detectors. "Judge Miller is presiding. He's Robert's college roommate. He refused my motion for recusal." "Can he do that?" Sarah asked. "He just did," Henderson said. "This is going to be a slaughter." Inside the courtroom, the Pendelton family sat on the plaintiff's side. They looked refreshed, confident. Linda was wearing a modest black dress, playing the role of the bereaved daughter to perfection. Robert gave Sarah a smirk that chilled her blood. The proceedings were a nightmare. Linda's lawyer, a man named Sterling Sarah, remembered the name from a billboard, though she wouldn't speak it painted a picture of Sarah that was monstrous. He called witness after witness, maids who had been fired years ago. A doctor who had only seen Arthur once, all paid to testify that Sarah was controlling and abusive. She isolated him, the lawyer thundered. She poisoned his mind against his own flesh and blood. This will is the product of coercion. When it was Henderson's turn, he tried to fight back. He brought up the lack of visits from the family. He brought up the phone logs. But Judge Miller sustained every objection Linda's lawyer made and overruled every point Henderson tried to score. "Mr. Henderson," the judge drawled, looking bored, "let's stick to the facts of the will, not the family's travel itinerary." By the afternoon recess, Sarah felt physically ill. She sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, her head in her hands. "We're losing," she said to Beatrice. "We are," Beatrice agreed, calmly checking her phone. "But remember the plan. Let them overreach." Back in the courtroom, Judge Miller cleared his throat to deliver his preliminary ruling. Given the substantial evidence of undue influence, the judge began not even looking at Sarah, and the questionable circumstances surrounding the drafting of this new will, the court is issuing a temporary injunction. Linda squeezed Robert's hand, a victorious smile breaking through her mask of grief. "Ms. Jenkins is hereby removed as executor of the estate, pending a full trial," the judge continued. "Control of the Pendelton assets will revert to the next of kin, Mr. Robert Pendelton, who will act as temporary administrator. Furthermore, Ms. Jenkins is ordered to vacate the premises immediately and return all property removed from the estate, including any documents or keys." "Your Honor." Henderson stood up. "This is highly irregular. You are effectively handing the estate to the plaintiffs before a trial has even occurred." "Sit down, counselor, or I will hold you in contempt," Judge Miller snapped. "Ms. Jenkins, you have 24 hours to surrender the keys and any estate records. Court adjourned." The gavel banged. It sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. Linda walked over to Sarah's table. She didn't shout this time. She leaned in close, smelling of expensive perfume and victory. "I told you," Linda whispered. "You're nothing. Bring the keys to my office tomorrow. And bring that lockbox Brett told me about. If anything is missing, I'll have you arrested for theft." Sarah looked at Linda. In the past, she would have looked down. She would have apologized. But today, the anger inside her was a cold, hard knot. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Linda," Sarah said quietly. Linda laughed. "Oh, I will. I'm listing the mansion for sale tomorrow morning." As the family swept out of the courtroom, laughing and high-fiving their lawyers, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Mr. Henderson. He looked defeated. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I've never seen a judge so biased. We can appeal, but it will take months. By then they'll have liquidated the assets and hidden the money offshore." "We don't have months," Sarah said. She looked at Beatrice. Beatrice nodded. "It's time for the Hail Mary." "What's the Hail Mary?" Sarah asked. Beatrice pulled a folder from her briefcase. Arthur had a clause in the company bylaws, a poison pill meant to trigger only in the event of a hostile takeover. He never thought his own family would be the hostile force, but here we are. What does it do? It requires a full independent audit of the company's financials before any transfer of ownership can occur, Beatrice said. But it has to be triggered by a majority vote of the board. "Robert controls the board," Henderson pointed out. "They're all his cronies." "Not all of them," Beatrice said. She pulled out a photo. It showed a man in his 40s, stern-faced, wearing military fatigues in an old picture. There is one board member who has been absent for 5 years. He holds the deciding vote. Arthur gave him a seat for life. Who is he? Sarah asked. His name is Julian. No, sorry. Beatrice corrected herself. His name is Lucas Vance. No, that's not right either. Beatrice frowned, checking the file. His name is Daniel Thorne. Wait, no. Sarah looked at the file. It says Commander Jack Reaver. Right, Beatrice said. Jack Reaver. He's a ghost, former Special Forces. He disappeared into the mountains years ago. He hates Robert. He hates politics, but he loved Arthur. If we can find him and get him to the emergency board meeting on Friday, we can block the sale of the house and trigger the audit. And if we can't find him? Sarah asked. Then Robert sells the company, sells the house, and you end up with nothing, Beatrice said. Where is he? Last known location was a cabin in the Bitterroot Mountains, Beatrice said. It's a 6-hour drive, and a blizzard is coming. Sarah stood up, smoothing her skirt. The fear was gone. In its place was a singular burning purpose. Give me the car keys, Sarah said. Sarah, Henderson warned. It's dangerous. They took my home, Sarah said. They trashed Arthur's legacy. I'm not letting them win. I'll find him. The blizzard in the Bitterroot Mountains was not just a weather event. It was a white wall of death. Sarah drove Beatrice's heavy-duty SUV, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, as the windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the snow. She was 4 hours into the drive and 10 miles from civilization. The GPS had died an hour ago, leaving her with only a hand-drawn map Beatrice had scribbled on a napkin. Turn left at the Twisted Pine. Follow the logging road for 3 miles. Sarah couldn't even see the road, let alone a specific pine tree. Her heart hammered in her chest. If she failed, Robert would sell the company tomorrow. The house would be gone. Arthur's legacy would be liquidated to pay for Linda's vacations and Brett's sports cars. Suddenly, the SUV hit a patch of black ice, hidden under the powder. The rear end fishtailed violently. Sarah pumped the brakes a mistake, and the heavy vehicle spun. The world became a blur of white and grey, until crunch. The SUV slid into a snowbank, tilting dangerously to the side. The engine sputtered and died. Silence. Sarah sat there for a moment, breathing in the cold air. She turned the key. Click, click, click. Dead battery. No, she whispered. No, please. She checked her phone. No service. She looked out the window. According to the odometer, she was still 2 miles from where Jack Reaver's cabin was supposed to be. 2 miles in a blizzard. She thought of the warm library at the mansion. She thought of Arthur. Then she thought of Linda's smirk in the courtroom. Sarah grabbed the flashlight, wrapped her scarf tighter around her face, and opened the door. The wind hit her like a physical blow, screaming in her ears. She stepped out into knee-deep snow and began to walk. Every step was agony. The cold bit through her boots, numbing her toes. Her eyelashes froze together. But she kept moving, putting one foot in front of the other, reciting the names of the people who had hurt her to keep the fire of anger burning. Linda, Robert, Brett, Judge Miller. After what felt like hours, she saw a flicker of orange light through the trees. A chimney. She stumbled into a clearing. There, almost buried in snow, was a small log cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. Sarah fell against the heavy wooden door and pounded on it with her frozen fists. Help! Please, The door swung open instantly. A man stood there, silhouetted by the firelight. He was huge, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that looked like chipped flint. He held a shotgun loosely in one hand. "Get off my porch," he growled. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "Jack? Reva?" Sarah chattered, her teeth clattering so hard she could barely speak. "Who wants to know?" "Arthur sent me," she lied, desperate. The man's eyes narrowed. He looked at her, a small, freezing woman in a business suit covered in snow. He stepped back and lowered the gun. "Get in, before you freeze to death and I have to dig a hole for you." Sarah stumbled inside and collapsed on the rug in front of the roaring fireplace. The heat was painful as it hit her frozen skin. Jack threw a rough wool blanket over her and handed her a tin mug of black coffee. "Arthur's dead," Jack said flatly, sitting in a rocking chair and cleaning his gun. "I read the obituary, so don't lie to me. Who are you?" "I'm Sarah," she said, clutching the mug. "I took care of him." "The nurse?" Jack grunted. "Arthur wrote to me about you, said you were quiet as a mouse." "I used to be," Sarah said. She reached into her wet coat pocket and pulled out the plastic-wrapped journal. "Robert is selling the company tomorrow. He's liquidating everything. The pension fund, the house, the charity." Jack didn't look up. "Not my problem. I left that world 10 years ago. Snakes, all of them." "He's stealing from the workers," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "He's been embezzling for 4 years. Arthur found out. That's why they drugged him. That's why they killed him." Jack stopped cleaning the gun. He looked up slowly. "Killed him. They withheld his heart medication." Sarah said, tears mixing with the melting snow on her face. "Arthur wrote it all down. In here." She held out the journal. Jack stood up and snatched the book. He flipped through the pages, reading Arthur's shaky handwriting. His face remained stone, but his jaw clenched tight enough to snap a bolt. He stopped at a specific page. "Jack was the only honest man I ever knew. I hope he forgives me for not listening to him about Robert years ago." Jack closed the book. He stared into the fire for a long time. The wind howled outside, shaking the cabin walls. "The board meeting is at 9:00 a.m. in Seattle," Sarah said softly. "If you don't come, they win. Evil wins." Jack looked at Sarah. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire Arthur used to have before the sickness. "My truck has chains," Jack said, standing up and grabbing a heavy coat from a hook. "It'll take us 6 hours to get down the mountain in this mess." "We have 7 hours," Sarah said, standing up. Jack cracked a rare, terrifying smile. "Then we better drive fast." The boardroom at Pendelton Enterprises was a glass-walled aquarium of corporate greed. Robert sat at the head of the table looking like a king. Linda was to his right, already browsing real estate listings in Italy on her iPad. "Ideally, we wrap this up by 10, Robert said to the gathered board members, most of whom looked uncomfortable but too afraid to speak. "The buyer is ready to wire the funds. We just need the formal vote to bypass the standard audit." "Is that wise, Robert?" an older board member asked. "The bylaws state. The bylaws are guidelines," Robert snapped. "Arthur is dead. I am the CEO. We vote now. All in favor of the immediate sale of assets." Hands began to go up around the table. 1, 2, 3. "Wait!" a voice boomed from the doorway. The double doors swung open. Security guards were trying to block the entrance, but they were shoved aside by a massive figure in a flannel shirt and muddy boots. Jack Reva walked into the boardroom like a bear entering a campsite. Behind him was Sarah, wearing her wrinkled suit, hair messy, but eyes sharp as daggers. "Jack." Robert stood up, his face draining of color. You're supposed to be in the mountains. You're dead." "Disappointed," Jack growled. He walked to the empty seat at the end of the table, his seat, and sat down. He placed Arthur's journal on the table with a heavy thud. "I am an active member of this board," Jack announced, his voice filling the room. "And I am invoking Article 42 of the company charter. The poison pill. I demand an immediate third-party forensic audit of all accounts before any sale can proceed." "You can't do that," Linda shrieked. "We have a majority." "Article 42 requires a single veto from a founding member," Jack said calmly. "I veto." Robert slammed his hands on the table. "Security, get this hobo out of here." "I wouldn't do that," Sarah spoke up. She stepped forward, standing next to Jack. "Because Mr. Reaver didn't come alone." Sarah pointed to the door. Two men in dark suits walked in. They weren't security guards. They wore windbreakers with 3 yellow letters on the back, FBI. "Robert Pendelton," the lead agent said, walking around the table. "We received a digital packet of evidence this morning regarding wire fraud and embezzlement of the Pendleton pension fund. We'd like you to step away from the computer." "This is a lie," Robert screamed, sweat pouring down his face. "She forged it." "That journal is fake. We aren't here for the journal," the agent said, pulling out handcuffs. "We're here for the bank records your former accountant, Mr. Henderson, just provided to us. He turned state's witness an hour ago." Linda gasped. "Henderson? That traitor?" As Robert was handcuffed and led out screaming threats, Linda stood up, grabbing her purse. "Well, this has nothing to do with me. I'm just a beneficiary. I'm leaving." "Sit down, Mrs. Smythe," the agent said. "We have questions for you regarding the medical care of the late Arthur Pendleton. We're opening a homicide investigation." Linda collapsed into her chair, her face a mask of horror. "But it wasn't over." "This stops the sale," Sarah said, looking at the remaining board members. "But it doesn't give me back my home. We have a court hearing at 1:00 p.m. The courtroom at 1:00 p.m. was packed. The news of Robert's arrest had broken, and the media frenzy was at a fever pitch. Judge Miller was nowhere to be seen. In his place sat Judge Patterson, a stern woman known for her absolute lack of tolerance for nonsense. Linda, released on bail, but looking disheveled and terrified, sat with her lawyer. Brett was there nursing his broken hand, looking small and scared. Sarah sat with Beatrice and Mr. Henderson, who had cut a deal for immunity. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Patterson adjusted her glasses and looked at the files in front of her. She looked at Linda, then at Sarah. "I have reviewed the emergency motion filed by Ms. Jenkins," Judge Patterson began, "and I have reviewed the findings of the preliminary FBI audit." She paused, the silence in the room stretching like a rubber band about to snap. "The previous injunction issued by this court is hereby vacated immediately." Judge Patterson ruled. "Furthermore, the last will and testament of Arthur Pendleton is recognized as valid." Linda let out a sob. "However," the judge continued, her voice hardening, "given the evidence of malicious litigation fraud and the looting of the estate assets by the plaintiffs, this court is taking an unusual step." The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Smythe, Mr. Smythe, not only are you stripped of any claim to the Pendleton estate, but I am also ordering the immediate seizure of your personal assets to repay the $400,000 borrowed from the company accounts to fund your legal defense." "Everything," Linda whispered. But the house in the Hamptons, my jewelry, everything, Judge Patterson said. You will leave this courtroom with nothing but the clothes on your back. Judgment is awarded to Sarah Jenkins in the full amount of the estate, plus punitive damages. The gavel banged. Bam! The relatives froze. Linda stared at the floor, unable to move. Brett put his head in his hands. The reality hit them all at once. The money, the power, the status, it was all gone. Sarah stood up. She didn't cheer. She didn't gloat. She simply turned to look at them. Linda looked up, her eyes pleading. Sarah, we're family. Where will we go? Sarah looked at the woman who had tormented her for a decade. I hear the hiring market is tough, Sarah said quietly. But I'm sure you'll figure it out, just like I had to. She turned and walked out of the courtroom. Beatrice and Jack were waiting for her in the hallway. So, Jack said, crossing his massive arms, you're the boss now. What's the first move? Sarah smiled. It was a real smile, bright and free. First, she said, we turn the mansion into a care facility for the elderly. No one dies alone again. Not on my watch. And second, Beatrice asked. Second, Sarah said, linking arms with her new family. I'm going to buy a really nice blue suit. The heavy doors of the courthouse swung open, and Sarah Jenkins stepped out into the sunlight. The storm was over. Sarah kept her promise. The Pendelton estate was transformed into the Arthur House, a world-class hospice centre funded by the family fortune. Robert and Linda faced years of legal battles and eventually prison time for their crimes. Brett was forced to get a job at a car wash, ironically washing the Porsches he used to drive. Sarah never married, but she was never lonely. She ran the company with Jack and Beatrice by her side, proving that true family isn't about blood. It's about who stands with you in the storm. The quiet mouse had found her roar, and the world finally listened. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit the like button. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic stories where the underdog takes it all. See you in the next video.